Welcome back to A People's Guide to Publishing. I'm Joe Beal, the founder and CEO of Microcosm Publishing and Distribution. I'm also the author of A People's Guide to Publishing, which distills what I've learned from selling millions of books over the past 25 years.
I'm Ellie Blue. I'm the editorial and marketing director here at Microcosm. We are an independent mid-list publisher based in Portland, Oregon, and Cleveland, Ohio. We have over 700 books, over 25 employees, and we make about 40 new books every year. And we distribute thousands of titles from other publishers.
We started this podcast so that we can share what we've learned with newer publishers so that you can learn from our mistakes.
Or maybe you just want to understand the publishing industry.
This week, we have special guest to the pod, Set Sytes, author of...
Hi, Set.
Hello.
Dozens, millions of books, an ever-increasing volume across a multitude of genres. Do you know how many you have completed? Does anyone know?
God, I don't know. I won't take your time up counting them all. I think maybe 16 at this point. Maybe.
Oh, wow.
You see my point. No one knows. So many that no one can count. It's a number that it's like in experimental mathematics, it's a number that hasn't been created yet. So, but
impressive.
Maybe I don't want to assume, but I'm going to guess that your best-selling books are maybe How Not to Kill Yourself and Born to Be Weird and maybe Faces in the Dark. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I'm not sure about Faces in the Dark, but How Not to Kill Yourself, Born to Be Weird, I would say so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you
and those happen to be books that we've published by Set.
I'm putting it together now. And so we found you, or rather you found us, it's really hard to say, because Faith had bootlegged a copy of How Not to Kill Yourself that she purchased on Amazon and then printed and then kept in her waiting room. And her clients kept stealing it. So she eventually said, Joe, you have to publish this book because my clients keep stealing it. So I need more than one copy at a time.
And just shows that stealing can be good.
I mean, she stole it from you, so that's,
All works out in the end.
Karma.
Yeah.
So
what
is your recollection of what happened after that?
I got a notification on my website that I didn't see from you, I think. Yeah, from you, about saying, this Texan doctor has told us about your work, we'd like to publish you. So when I saw it a month later, because I get no notifications from my website, which is excellent, I just thought, scam. I was very cagey, thinking my reply, probably saying this is probably a scam, but at least I replied. I thought, just in case, message. And then I got over a course of many emails, got slightly more convinced, but I was still probably very I'm gonna, at some point, everyone's gonna go, ha, we got you.
And I'm still waiting on our payment from you. I haven't received it yet. Do you know it's 1 million British pounds, which is I think 10 million US dollars now?
You can just give us your bank account number and we'll take care of it.
Yeah, we'll do the rest. We're really good at that part. But so, and then your book came out, and then we sold them all, and then we did another edition, and we're well on our way to selling all of those. And then Sarah, who is actually like sort of dually in editorial and in charge of managing the receiving department, she was like, I read some of Set's other books, and they're really good. And that was like sort of the next part. And then we sold out of the first editions of Born to Be Weird, and then it was at that point we actually it was like similar to your website bump. We had an incident where we tried to order more, and there was some kind of technological problem where it wouldn't accept that we had an account and that we had printed this book before. So I just gave up. And then when people kept asking for Born to Be Weird, we were just like, well, I guess we'll just have to do a new edition and make them proper. And so you just
I
keep
have no
doing
idea about this. Yeah, I'm out of the loop.
but that, and you know, and then we got to take some of the new stories and then all the old stories and like make a longer book. And I mean, I think technically that doesn't actually come out until December, but we do have them, and it is very good, and it's very nice. Have you received yours yet?
No, unfortunately not. I'm probably going to take another 9 months to get to Britain, I think, judging by previous experience.
Yeah, no, yeah, I apologize. Oh, for anyone who is unfamiliar, Set is not from the United States. Set is from.
Wait, what?
Tell by the strange accent.
It's not a put on. It is actually. Whereas mine is very manufactured. Set's accent is legitimately British, which somehow means that everything from like money to books take so much longer to get there.
Yeah, an accent that no one in Britain can place actually in my whole life. It's accentless British. It's generic.
So I want to know more about Born to Be Weird, since that's the topic of this podcast. And I also kind of want to know more about like your story as a writer and publishing your own books and working with us, Set. Which one do you want to talk about first?
Oh God, you might have to pick out of those. What were the options?
Let's talk about you. So yeah, how did you get your start, like writing and self-publishing?
Were you born to be weird?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. As soon as I popped out, they were just looking at me like, "Oh God, it's a weirdo." And I've liked writing for as long as I know, since I was a kid. But I was always writing because I grew up on Discworld, and I was always writing for long. It took me way too long to get out of the habit of just writing comic fantasy, of just like really ridiculous stuff that made no sense. And I was reading and I wrote that for years and years and years, just farce. And then as I became later in teenage years, I was becoming a bit more edgy and got into sort of metal music and stuff. I started trying to write darker things and indulging my inner edge. And then I kind of found a happy balance between them. But it wasn't until 2012 maybe that I actually finished something, because I having a ADHD, I just flipped between millions of projects. I'd start something, get really carried away, write all the chapter titles, draw all the creatures, write all the descriptions of characters, everything. This not actually write the story, maybe bits of chapters, and then I'd be like, next thing, and I'd do another thing, and then another thing. And I design video games, and I just do everything, but very much can't see the forest for the trees kind of work. Or maybe it's the other way. I don't know, one of those way rounds. And then in 2012, I finally finished, because I was in like a really bad way in my living situation. I was really miserable, and work was just disaster. So I finally finished a book, it was semi-autobiographical, fantasy. In hindsight, I think it was terrible, but it was my first thing I finished. Put it out there. And then that kind of broke the seal. And ever since then, I've not really much trouble finishing things. But various short stories written after that point, that eventually, because I was trying to get as much out online in terms of single format stuff as I could do, just kind of inundating with my name on as many books I could. So I collect this into a collection, collect these other short stories into a collection. Born to Be Weird, Faces in the Dark, and they existed obviously pre-Microcosm, but in a slightly different form. And then when it came to Microcosm, then I guess as a kind of favor to me, we ended up publishing those things. And then now we're doing it again, but properly, I guess.
Where how were you self-publishing? What was your platform?
You know what the platform is. It was Amazon. As As we've
Thou
all
one who
learned,
shall not be named.
as all self-publishers have learned, or most of us, in that if you're trying to be self-published without any sort of clout behind you, if you turn your back on Amazon, you kind of have almost signed your own death now, because you're kind of trying to do the whole thing on ultra hard mode without Amazon, sad as that is, because they corner so much of the market. So yeah, so what you saying, and it's been a definite learning experience getting stuff out there.
And it seems like everybody that I know that does that, they're like, Amazon is like a gamified system, but the rules change every month. So, I mean, I definitely know people that like their full-time job is figuring out what the current game of Amazon is and how to play it effectively. Do you invest yourself in that at all?
I think that's just would serve to give me a headache. I don't know much about. I do know from one experience that Amazon are they're simultaneously helping self-published authors, obviously selfishly, but at the same time, they also are very kind of biased against them, especially things like reviews, their own rating system, advertising them to other people. They are more unfair towards self-publishers than anything. So you're much more likely to say get positive reviews of your own taken down, and just be buried at the bottom of a big pile of authors that they want to promote, while also they will cut you off as much as they can from other distributors because they want to own you. So you're really kind of taking blessings and curses almost at the same time. On one hand, you get much higher royalty rates, but on the other hand, you're making a lot of little sacrifices and just general stuff that will be frustrating. Just like, why is this the case? Amazon won't give you an answer, and you just have to roll with it.
What are now you've worked with Amazon self-publishing and you've worked with us in a more traditional author-publisher relationship. Like, how do you compare and contrast those experiences?
I mean, it's completely different, and it was a learning experience for both of them, and I think so. Obviously, there's a lot more put on me when it comes to self-publishing, and that's a lot more for me to learn. And don't get me wrong, there's been extreme frustrations doing that and doing this learning thing, because it's just been me and doing stuff I had no idea to do, like creating paperbacks, formatting all this stuff, and getting out there and dealing with the sort of business side of things is an absolute pain, and has kept me up till 5 a.m. many nights tearing my hair out. And it's got easier over time, but there's lots of stuff I wish I'd known years ago, just known from the beginning, and plenty of, especially formatting stuff that's made absolutely no sense over and over, and just leaves me like yelling, like, why is it this happening? Why are there extra blank pages in this document when they don't exist in Word? So I didn't get that with Microcosm, thankfully. It's less of a learning experience and it's more of a social learning experience. It's learning how to let go more, I would say. Obviously full creative control, self-publishing, and I have to give some of that up and working with traditional publishers. I have to sort of let certain things go. I can't have like tight hold of the reins in every single instance in many respects, in terms of formatting, in terms of covers, in terms of just the way things go. So it is nice. It's nice handing it over and not having to do all work. But on the other hand, you have to be less of a stubborn bastard, as I've certainly grown up to be.
I was amazed how little fuss you put up when we Americanized all your spellings.
I think by that point, I kind of accepted certain things, like the robes and versus dressing gowns. Something is still a bother.
Thank you for your forbearance.
But I'm a patient man. I think more is.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say more is I have so many questions. Like when it's just me doing it, questions are things I just have to answer myself. I have to look up and find out. But when you're dealing with other people, all you can do is ask the questions and wait, and then you become conscious of being annoying with the sheer amount of questions I want to ask, like why this, why was this? There's so much I don't understand. And whereas if it was just me, I could spend as many hours as I wanting trying to understand, Googling relentlessly, trial and error. I don't get that the other side, because obviously you're just relying on someone else's time to patiently answer your million questions.
What about on the other end, like after the book is out, like in terms of like reaching readers and hearing from them and like selling books and getting paid? Like what are the differences there that for you?
So, oh god, that's many of the questions in one. Getting paid is, in terms of Microcosm, that's quite. While I've had many confusions about the actual system that you use,
It's confusing.
Yeah, it was straightforward in terms of actually money, coming in. But Amazon, I just in a really unprofessional way, I haven't even paid any attention to it, because it goes into account. I kind of often forget it's not there, and becomes, instead of like lump amounts, it just comes in drips and drabs. So there's no point looking and saying, oh right, so you got £2 here and £4 here and £3 here, and add it all up. So I kind of don't, which I really should do, because it's my own finances, but I just don't. In terms of, say, feedback from people, so Microcosm is great. I've had lots of emails regarding how not to kill yourself from random strangers that I have no idea, that just, yes, I've had quite a lot of it, but they're all very nice to receive. They're all also very strange to receive, because even when they come, even all these years later, it's still unexpected, because it's still part of me like, what? First of all, you read it, and second of all, like, you find it that helpful. I know for people from all sorts of walks of life, so I've had kind of interesting conversations with some of them. But it's very rewarding. It's very nice to receive that. It's very different system. Self-publishing is less that you don't get, say, emails from people saying, oh, I love this book. It's more conversations that have been struck up, generally on things like Reddit. Sometimes if you get to know people, it'll eventually become maybe WhatsApp for a few people. You kind of foster relationships with people who are reading a book. You get to know them over time and back and forth, other authors especially. And then over time, you kind of have a rapport with them. And also you get lots of like comments. I do a lot of sort of like self-promotion on Reddit, and you get a lot of comments where people say, "Oh yeah, I read that thing," and that's nice to see. But it's a very different vibe to, say, getting emails and messages, say through Facebook or through email direct to me, saying, like, someone actually reaching out, "We read this, helped me, it saved my life, thank you so much." And that's a very different thing to be like, "Oh yeah, I like this story you wrote."
Right, like the stakes are just higher, and yeah, I found it too. Like I've heard a lot of people say like, this is the best suicide resource I have ever come across, and I'm like, oh wow, that's big. Like,
it's not something that's ever going to sink in with me. I don't really understand it. It's one of those things, like, I'm biased against my own book, and I'm sure a lot of authors feel that way about their own work. I know there's plenty of big bestsellers, big names who sort of like their first book or some of their first two books are like, nah, they think it's rubbish. And other people love it. And because it's a genre, How Not to Kill Yourself is in a genre, self-help, that I don't read. So I'm in a position of thinking that I wouldn't read my own book. And once you're in a position, which sounds a terrible to promote to other people, but I'm like, look, I'm not you. Like, I'm really happy that you enjoy it. But it's weird to think of me to reading my own books. That's where it's hard to get in the headspace of people who are really effusive about how much they liked it. So I'm really appreciative, but one part of me is just never going to fully get it, which is weird because I wrote the thing.
So we've mostly been talking about your book, How Not to Kill Yourself, which I think is your best-selling book and the first one we published with you. And now we have this second edition of your short story collection, Born to Be Weird, which is all fiction, more fantasy horror. Like, what's the connection between those two books? Like, if you were talking to somebody and they were like, what do you write? And you were like, here are my two books, I guess, how would you bridge that?
Oh God, that's a good question and very hard one to answer. I suppose you could say a clue would be in the title, being born to be weird. Like those stories wouldn't exist if I wasn't weird. And being weird leads you into the whole, this distance from society and struggling with general life because you're not as normal as everyone else. And that leads into the how not to kill yourself thing. Like how not to kill yourself isn't just self-help for anyone. It's specified to sort of artistic types who sort of struggle and creative people who feel like there's not really a place for them in the world. And then that's the argument is to essentially put more of your own creativity out into the world to better live yourself. So I suppose in a way, Born to be Weird is an example of me doing that for myself. Like writing those stories makes me feel better, and always does. Being productive in that creative sense will always make me feel better. So that's kind of my remedy in a sense. Born to be Weird is the remedy, and then how not to kill yourself is the sort of instruction guide.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you talk a lot about in How Not to Kill Yourself that like writing stories is a good way out of a dark reality. I mean, it seems like that's a strong connection too. So, like, were these the stories you were talking about?
I mean, they'd be included, I suppose. I mean, because I write all sorts. So, I mean, it's not all stuff. A lot of the stuff I write is dark or dark tinged. Not all of it, but even when I'm trying to write something, I won't say happy-go-lucky, but something more optimistic. Eventually, at some point, I'll be like, "Oh, you've made it dark again," without being able to help yourself. So I guess that is just part of my nature, but it does. I don't know. I suppose it's cathartic in a sense. You get that out of there. You get sort of inner demons out of there, and you also. But then a lot of it is just an aesthetic thing on my sense. It's supposed to different kinds of darkness. There's sort of an internal thing where you're like getting out catharsis of sort of emotions and sort of stuff that you might deal with in everyday life, but in a fantasy or horror setting. And then there's the darkness of just like, monsters and ghouls. This is cool. I'm enjoying this, which is a hard thing to explain for people who didn't grow up like that. Like, why is anyone like horror stories? Why is anyone like dark gothic things? And that's a thing that's almost impossible to explain. It seems to be the nature of elements of humanity.
And I mean, and you wrote like the toilet story and any number of other things that, like, you truly have like a unique and gifted mind. Like, does it feel good to write those kind of stories?
Yeah, yeah. The toilet story is an interesting one because I was surprised to find that as lots of people's favorite of the book, and I thought it'd be the book, the story where people stop reading because it's just like, this is awful. Who's written this is disgusting.
No, you're right.
Yeah, so I was quite astonished to find out. Oh yeah, my favorite was the one I guess swallowed by a toilet.
What's your favorite story in the book?
My favorite story is either the School of Necromancy or maybe just above that, Quetzalcoatl, because I love the pairing of, because I love Mesoamerican stuff, and Mesoamerican fantasy is quite hard to find. So I love the pairing of that with Lovecraft, and putting Lovecraft taken away from the New England setting and putting him in a completely different setting. So I think that's might be my favorite. Or School of Necromancy being set in York, where I live.
Mm-hmm.
Gives you another view on the place you live. So when we did the second edition, it actually has like a lot of new stories. Like you took out some stories and added a ton of new ones. How did you choose what to remove, what to add? What was your process there?
Did we remove any? I can't remember removing any.
Maybe we didn't. I don't know. I wasn't the editor. We might just have added
remove any, then they clearly were so inconsequential that I've completely forgotten their existence. So including some, this was self-admittedly me being, well, I want to use a word other than lazy, but I'm going to say lazy. So I haven't written short stories in quite a long time. I kind of struggled to get back into it, and I was so set on finishing sort of various series of my own that there was nothing. I'd felt no real force to write a short, so at least maybe no ability to write one. I'm sure at some point I will. So, but I had other short stories dotting around already. So I guess I just looked through all of them. A lot of them are rubbish. Added the ones that weren't rubbish, and then the other side is it Sarah, I think. Then obviously, and then decided like yes, this one, no, not that one.
How did you choose what sequence to put the stories in?
I don't think that was my choice, the sequence.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because I would have I think I would have done it slightly differently. Because there's a story called Halfway, and halfway doesn't appear halfway in the book, and that's why I would have.
Maybe it's a different evaluation of half.
Yeah.
I mean, the book is about being weird, like it's a weird definition of half.
Halfway in it. Well, the reason I called it halfway is it's quite an interesting edition because all the others are short stories. Halfway wasn't originally a short story. Halfway was called An Adventure of Unparalleled Importance, and it was a full novel. It was my first novel, the one I said was terrible. Well, not terrible, but it was something I grew later kind of embarrassed about certain parts of it. But the part that was called Halfway was one section that appeared halfway through the book. So it's basically one chapter, really. And then I suddenly got it, and I read the chapter, and I actually quite liked that chapter. It wasn't full of like the sort of stuff that would make me cringe later on, and I liked some of the parts of it. And I thought it could be interesting to take that, completely erase it from all context, and have the reader immediately faced with the fact, okay, well, the adventure's already been going on for, you're just stuck. You're not with no context or background to what the adventure's about, but you're just halfway through it. And so you immediately play it's halfway. That's why I decided to call it Halfway. And then you do part of the adventure, and then you whisk stuff again to another short story. And I kind of like the idea of that. It's confusing, I get deliberately, but I like the chapter enough that ended up included.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was part of it originally, I think I did.
You didn't really answer the question though about like, does it feel good to write weird stories? Like, is it fulfilling, or is that just like a part of yourself that can't ever be satisfied?
I think, that's got to be a mixture, I think. So like when I think before I learned to talk about my stories in a less pretentious way, I would say like, oh, writing is like an exorcism. It's like getting demons out of me and putting on the paper, and it's not that I enjoy it. It's that it's just bringing stuff out of me. And then late after years more, I was like, don't talk about it like that. No, I do enjoy writing, and I enjoy writing weird stuff. I've written some very strange stuff and some very, very, very dark stuff in my life. And I'm kind of fond of all of it. There's parts where I think this is sort of not great writing, but there's not really parts where I thought you've gone too far. I think, there's some bits I would do differently, but overall, I enjoy writing weird stuff, dark stuff. I'd say it is part of my mentality, in a sense, part of my sense of aesthetics, or maybe I don't want to think of it as just being shocking. I try not to write something, shock for shock's sake, which I know some people do. But there is still a kind of weird pleasure in writing a particular scene that is extremely fucked up, and you read it back, you're like, oh god, yeah, but in a good way.
And are there like muses or inspirations that you have for that style of writing?
Honestly, while there's a number of authors I'm sure have had their influence me, in terms of dark stuff, honestly, it's more music than actually reading. Like, not much of what I've read, because I don't read that much horror. I've read some, but not much of it I really feel has particularly inspired me or influenced me. Like, I feel like I was writing that kind of stuff before I was reading it. So I think things like a lot of sort of dark music, and especially music videos and stuff, influenced me very much in my teenage years, especially. And I probably wouldn't be the person I was today if I hadn't watched and listened to them. Back when I used to wear bright colours.
Please said
so
both.
yeah, yeah, reading this, so listening to this stuff. Actually, I just kind of got in a sense of mind of sort of the aesthetics of it all, and something in me I don't know, because obviously people can listen and watch this stuff and be extremely averse to it and think, oh, this is horrible. And something obviously different about my mind. I think at the beginning I thought it was horrible, but you kind of get accustomed to it. You think, oh, that stuff's too much. But this stuff, yeah, it's kind of cool. And then you kind of take another step and you're like, that stuff that you originally thought was, oh, you're like, oh, no, actually, it's actually my realm of fucked up because my Overton window of fucked up has shifted. So yeah, I would say musically, but it's hard to pinpoint specific artists. It's just a big realm of weird and dark metal and rock. Yeah, and movies very much, especially. Like, I think a lot of it, I'm a very visual writer, and my imagination is very visual, so I get influenced a lot more by cinematic mediums and all mediums than reading, I think.
Did you watch Stranger Things?
I did. I do enjoy it. Yeah, definitely.
I finally watched it, and it made me understand the cover on the new edition of Born to Be Weird a little bit better.
What was the?
I'm pretty sure. I don't know. Joe, is the cover like a Stranger Things nod?
I think it's more of a Cthulhu meets that.
Yeah.
The general style of like detective pulp novels. That was my.
I think so, yeah. And a lot of this stuff. A lot of the stuff I don't think probably owes something to Lovecraft, because like without that influence, a lot of this stuff like tentacle imagery and stuff that came about when it's sort of unknown horrors and stuff, probably. I mean, I'm sure they would have existed at some point, but a lot of it derived originally from Lovecraftian horror.
So you were alive in the 80s. I listened to a program this morning that said that the reason that Stranger Things was so effective is because they got like the hair and the mall and the clothes and like sort of the
Trapper
culture,
Keeper,
like the don't tell your parents culture of things. They got that so right that it made it believable when they started to move into like fantasy and where they, and then that. Do you think about like the believability factors in your story, or like how your stories or how they work? Or
I was going to say, first, being alive in the 80s, I would say I was 2 at the end of the 80s. Oh. So I'm sure it's a very fake nostalgia going on there.
You're not the only one.
My own, the believability. Yeah, sometimes I think you can be so strange and imaginative that you lose any sense of being grounded. And I think I often struggled with my own reading of very high epic fantasy for a long period in my life of this kind of stuff. And it turned up for a long time away from, wizards and sorcery and dark lords and elves and all this stuff. And still, to me, that's not my ideal kind of fantasy. I like stuff that has a kind of grounding in the real world, whether it's in the past or now, and then layers fantasy on top of it, which I think is a big part of why something like Harry Potter became so popular, is that you've got, like a bully child wanting a new kind of different life, and it's overlaying your ordinary understanding of the world with like, oh, this is all fantasy magical. And I would do similar stuff, but generally with more horrific results. So, yeah, I think I like to have a sense of, I mean, there's only so much believability you can get by getting swallowed by a public toilet. Because if you're really a skeptic, someone's going to step in and say, I don't think that can happen.
Or that's their new fear.
Yeah, I really hope it is. I hope I've given someone a fear of deep-seated fear of being swallowed by a public toilet.
So like, I mean, have you seen the movie Jaws?
Of course, amazing.
Yeah. I didn't know if it was like hamburgers or something where like you find it repellent because of its Americanism. But So the thing when Jaws was new, people would not go in public chlorinated swimming pools because they were convinced that they would be full of sharks, which was impossible, you know? So it was like the suspension of disbelief went so full circle that people were like, I am going to die if I step in that puddle.
So yeah, because even in the sea, you're pretty much safe from great whites. They're not a violent species that attacks humans generally, and they're certainly not going to like kill you. It's very, very unlikely.
Or like,
but it doesn't change anything. Like if I'm in the deep water and I see shadows pass by underneath me, you're still gonna be like, oh god.
or like Hitchcock's The Birds, you know, it was kind of the same thing where like, you know, it's not really a problem, but then you like look up all the time and you develop, you know, it like taps into that part of your brain. And I think, you know, this is sort of the thing where like, because your work is imaginative, like you run this realm where people are like, oh, I've never thought of that. Do I need to think about that?
I like that sort of primordial sense of human brain where you can make fear out of just about anything. I like it. One of my favorites is trees. When you look at, and I think it was used the best effects in Wizard of Oz, but you can see just at night if you're walking about and you're looking at the way trees are around you, you're like, oh god, like I know they're just trees, they're not gonna hurt me, but you know, you never know, they might reach out with their arms and take me in.
Mm-hmm. But so do you think about that kind of stuff, or are you just like, I have a concept and I'm running with it?
Oh no, I'm constantly on some level scared of just about everything, or at least at night. Yeah. A lot of it comes from dreams and nightmares, but also sort of occasionally it kind of strays into waking hallucinations. So it's always like a blessing and a curse in that sense. Okay, I'm terrified, but it's going to be good for a story.
That's a good way to cope with your fears, I gotta say.
Yeah, I think like a lot of time it's something as simple as just like going upstairs to bed and turning all the lights off, and then you think, oh right, some sort of big werewolf zombie creature is racing up the stairs after me, and I've got to close the door before it gets in. So I generally kind of bar the door a bit whenever I go to bed, because even though I'm sure it won't take much effort to force the door open, it's a little bit more safety. And that's something I don't really enjoy. I don't like the idea of thinking the zombies at my window, even if I am on the second floor. But that same sense of imagination and thinking everything, you know, thinking in some senses, you know, monsters under the bed, that inspires stories, that lets me write stories. I couldn't have one without the other, really.
So what project are you working on now that you're most excited about?
I'm currently finishing up the editing to book 6 of this series called The Fifth Place, which is this weird West adult sci fantasy thing. And I'm finishing editing that to put out, and then I'm straight on to what I'm most excited for, which is book 5 of India Bones, which is this pirate fantasy. And that's a story where I go to this big continent called York, which is a kind of essentially a sort of frontier America if it was still run by the British Empire. So it's like pre-Independence Day. No, wait, Independence Day, pre-American Revolution. So, but so I'm gonna go fully into a lot of sort of old American history, frontier mythology, and Native American history and stuff, and trying to write based on it. And I'm really excited to do that. I've already written quite a bit. I'm really looking forward to doing that.
Nice.
Cool. Well, anything else that we all should talk about before we sign off and go our way?
Keep them coming, and think about, you know, the next thing that is going to launch the next series. You know, I mean, I think that's always
so yeah, I've got like 34 ideas, so many, because I think it was only a few weeks ago I suddenly realized this big revelation of like a shared universe and all these other stories and future novels that I've got kicking around and I've been writing bits to. I was like, oh, it's all part of the same thing. And then I was just like, this is 100 years after this is 100 years after this is set in a different part of the world, and that got me really enthused. And now it's going to be never ending, really. I'm sure I'll die before I've only done like 10% of it, but I'm excited.
It's good you never run out of ideas.
No, never.
Oh, I have one last question for Joe, actually. Do you see Microcosm publishing more fiction in the future? Because this is actually very rare for us.
Well, it's interesting. I receive, like we receive fiction pitches just about every day, and I have to just about every day explain that like we don't have the audience for it or the relationships for it. But then when you have things like this, where it's like, dare I say, far enough left of center, it like makes people interested again. And then it's like it works in the kind of stores that we work with all over again. So it's an odd sort of reversal. So it really depends, like, and I feel like weird is sort of a loaded word that is kind of put on people, but you put it on yourself in this case. So
Reclaim it.
And so like it's kind of a thing like that where like if you come up with something that is like conceptual and original enough, I feel like that's also the reason why these work. And then people are all of a sudden like, whoa, I had no idea, and I feel like we could do more with horror than a lot of genres. Like we couldn't really do much as like a genre fiction publisher, and we couldn't really do much as like, and we've tried doing young adult, and we've tried doing like a more traditional, not literary novels, but like more adult type novels. And it just really, people don't, I mean, there's so much of it out there that people don't really jump for it. But for this, they did, and I think that's interesting to me, but again, like these are genres outside of my expertise. So, it's like for the right project, we would absolutely do more, and that's anybody watching too, like that's not just like people we have relationships with.
Well, Set, thank you so much for joining us on the show, and it was great to see you again.
Mm-hmm. If you're ever in the colonies, look us up.
I will do. Same if you're ever here.
Thanks for joining us once again.
Please send your questions to podcast@microcosmpublishing.com so we can answer them on future episodes.
And please give us 5 stars on iTunes and everywhere else that podcasts are reviewed.
You can find us on the internet at microcosm.pub.
On Twitter at Microcosm.
On Facebook at Microcosm Publishing.
On Instagram at Microcosm_pub.
And here in Portland, Oregon on North Williams Avenue.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful week.